Gallop is a 1963 film and was the first sequel to Murder, She Said. The film again stars Margaret Rutherford as Miss Marple and was once again directed by George Pollock. The movie is loosely based on Agatha Christie's After the Funeral, changing the detective at the center of the story from Hercule Poirot to Jane Marple. After stumbling upon a dying elderly man, Miss Marple begins to suspect one of his heirs of having murdered him. When the police are skeptical of her theory, Miss Marple sets out to solve the case. What else is an older woman with too much time on her hands to do? Well, after the immense fun I had watching Murder, She Said, Murder at the Gallop had quite large shoes to fill, and I wasn't sure if they could pull it off. But they did. And quite easily too. A large part of that comes from the fact that I suspect the director and producers knew they had quite a good thing going, so this film follows a very similar structure as the first one, but I'll get to that. Margaret Rutherford is again wonderful as Miss Marple, and while watching this one, it dawned on me that I think she is to Miss Marple what Peter Ustinov is to Poirot. Neither one is 100% accurate when compared to their literary counterparts, but both actors bring such charm and so much energy to their roles. Although if we're going to discuss energy, I think Margaret Rutherford would easily best Peter Ustinov in any test of agility or speed. The number of times we see Miss Marple running, diving behind bushes, or sneaking through any number of places she really shouldn't be in this movie is so far unparalleled in terms of Marple adaptations. But besides that, she is incredibly funny. The way she will insert a facial expression, or raise her chin up to look at a taller co-star along with a perfectly timed dramatic pause. I just lose it over and over while watching these movies. She's also a very theatrical actress with grand motions. Just try and keep track of the number of times she whips a cape around her shoulders or especially swings a scarf around her neck. All of these things would look out of place from a lot of actors, but Margaret Rutherford imbues the character with this strong, powerful personality. So as a result, Miss Marple just comes across as not realizing how different she acts from those around her. And the reactions from the people she interacts with just underline that she's supposed to be seen as eccentric, both by the other characters and the audience. And one character that this especially applies to is Inspector Craddock. I have to apologize. I completely neglected to mention that character in my review of Murder, She Said. He was played then and now by Charles Tingwell, and he's great. He and Margaret Rutherford are perfect sparring partners, but what is so great about their relationship is how Craddock reacts to her. And both of these films, so far, have a similar progression to their relationship. They start with him dismissing her suspicions of a crime based on lack of evidence. He'll do some obligatory, nominal scolding when she inserts herself into the investigation, but as she gains ground and she increasingly needs his help to pull off her little plans, you can see how much he's enjoying watching her work. That's so much more satisfying than a constantly contentious antagonism between them. One moment I thought was just hilarious and delightful happened during one of Marple and Craddock's scenes together. Miss Marple is comparing this situation to Agatha Christie's book, The Ninth Life, and tells him that Agatha Christie's work should be compulsory reading for the police. Even though this book does not exist, I love that Miss Marple is plugging Agatha Christie in a movie. I'm sure Mrs. Christie enjoyed the advertising, even if the adaptations weren't all that faithful at the time. Inspector Craddock gets quite a few of those head-shaking smiles as she gives him her orders and takes off to instruct Mr. Stringer about his part in her plan. Speaking of which, Mr. Stringer is back too, played by Rutherford's husband, Stringer Davis. I loved him in this movie even more than last time, in part because it felt like his role was expanded. He's present for much of the first act and pops up again later for the remainder of the movie. Mr. Stringer is also forced to become a little more adventurous due to the urgings of Miss Marple. The entire sequence where they covertly attend the will reading for old Mr. Enderby is great. First, they're riding down the streets of St. Mary Mead, he on a tricycle, and she, of course, on a bicycle. Miss Marple would never need the assistance of a third wheel. They then both clamber up this hastily assembled staircase of barrels and crates to reach the window overlooking the will reading. Miss Marple poking her face up into the window opening was a nice reference to her trying to climb over the stone wall in Murder, She Said, by the way. What she listens to in that scene is also some nice, clever writing with the Enderby will filled with cutting remarks aimed at each of his heirs. And this is immediately followed by Craddock coming around the corner. The look on his face as he recognizes their bikes is priceless, followed by this great snap zoom capturing the two of them teetering by the open window. George Pollock knows how to wring every last drop of humor out of these stories. The Enderby clan is made up of, first, Robert Morley, a horse enthusiast and owner of the Gallop Hotel, where the film gets its title. He was very good, as usual. He's a very dependable character actor, and he's able to balance the role between a suspicious suspect and being almost giddy with admiration for Miss Marple's skill as a horsewoman. Pairing Robert Morley with Margaret Rutherford was a brilliant move, as both of them are masters at utilizing their extremely expressive faces. Robert Urquhart plays another Enderby relative, and with his dry British sarcasm and attitude, he reminded me so much of Herbert Marshall for some reason. Looks-wise, he was kind of a combination of Hugh Bonneville and Aidan Quinn, and I thought he was good as well. Katya Douglas is playing a niece to Old Man Enderby, and she was well cast as the kind of stock character of the spoiled rich girl who always gets what she wants. I believe she even says that exact line. And James Villiers didn't have a big part as the husband to Katya Douglas, but every time his character entered a room or came around the corner, I did a double take. It's not his face, but his haircut and costumes reminded me so much of George Bailey from the early scenes in It's a Wonderful Life. I promise I was actually paying attention to the film, not just making other movie comparisons the whole time. And finally, Flora Robson plays Miss Milcrest, the companion/housekeeper to Enderby's sister. Her nervous, fearful demeanor is a stark contrast to that of Miss Marple, and the two of them play a couple of very good scenes together. There are a couple of standout sequences that I should point out. Miss Marple discovers another dead body not long after the first one, and I love the shot where this enormous hat pin is in the foreground, stabbed through a chair into someone's back. Miss Marple's stunned expression in the background completes the shot. And another character is trampled to death after being locked into a horse stall with a particularly bad-tempered horse. I enjoy it when these movies will shake up the more subdued interrogations and evidence gathering with a shocking death scene, all tastefully done with no blood, of course, but it's a nice change of pace. Late in the film, there is a dance held at the Gallop Hotel, and Miss Marple chooses a somewhat unusual dress for a woman of her years. It's obvious she feels younger than she is, but what makes that scene such a joy to watch is both her and Mr. Stringer. They're trying to fit in with the young people and engage in some very of-the-time dance moves. I won't describe it any further, you kind of have to see it for yourself. Ron Goodwin returns to score this movie, and I'm happy to report that his Miss Marple theme is back with a vengeance. I said it last time and I'll say it again, I love the song. It's so upbeat and gets stuck in my head without much trouble at all, and that's not a complaint. This time, though, he adds some interesting variations on it, in particular a riding version to accompany Marple getting suited up in her riding gear, complete with horns and the usual fox hunt style music worked in. The main theme is used over and over in different forms, and I can't get enough. I wanted to mention as well, I discovered a version of the theme song on YouTube played by the Mandolin Orchestra of Ettlingen and the Mandolin Orchestra of Estonia. I think it's a really well done orchestration of the theme, so I'll include a link in the description if you're interested. It should help ingrain it in your mind if you feel like whistling it for the next week or so. I love the set decoration and the locations once again. It's a very consistent look, but in particular, the Gallop Hotel set was beautiful. It's filled with wood paneling and cozy British architecture, and I'll compliment something that other Agatha Christie adaptations have nailed as well: the geography of the central location. When a big part of your plot depends on following characters around and through and outside a certain place, you really only care as an audience member if you know where they are. And the cinematography does it very gracefully and simply, and I think it's important to acknowledge something like that goes unnoticed when it's done well, but it's so crucial. And the costumes. Everyone is decked out in tweed and plaid. I'm not British, I've only been there once so far, but there's just something about that look that is so familiar and warm. It's like the film equivalent of hot chocolate and a good book. An Agatha Christie novel, of course. Back to what I was saying at the start of this review, the film follows the formula laid out in Murder, She Said almost to a T. Marple stumbles across a dead body while the opening credits are still rolling. The police dismiss her suspicions, so she goes undercover in a sense to get close to the rich family connected to the case. We learn about a special skill that Miss Marple has that helps her during the mystery, whether that her being a champion golfer in her younger days or a champion horseback rider. There's a villainous-seeming working-class character, either a gardener or a stableman, The murders start to pile up about halfway to 2/3 of the way in, and Miss Marple is left to take on the murderer alone. She draws out a confession, the killer attempts to bump her off, and then the police bust in. An older man proposes marriage to her, she politely declines, and credits roll. Is it a little too similar? Maybe. But it works because of Margaret Rutherford, and the rest of the cast that have been assembled around her. And something else, the mystery plot is almost incidental. Yes, it drives everything Marple does, and the rest of the characters too, but when I'm having such a good time watching the character dynamics and listening to the sometimes quirky, always clever dialogue, the mystery almost doesn't matter. Afterwards, when I run through it all, I think it all still hangs together and works, but it's a credit to the film that a mystery doesn't have to strictly depend on red herrings and reveals to play as well as it does. Murder at the Gallop is a great watch, and the only reason that Murder, She Said edges it out for being better to me is that I watched it first, so it felt slightly more original. Everything else is slick, well done, and just plain fun. I'm very curious to see if the formula holds true in the next one, but Murder at the Gallop comes highly recommended. Thanks very much for watching my review. If you're enjoying these, please check back to Hildebrand Productions for more tittle-tattle from me about Miss Marple. Adios for now.